Class Show. My name is Andrew Stotts, and I'm going to be talking about constant growth model in valuation. And this is Friday, so I'm going to answer a question. And the question I've gotten is about the constant growth model. So let me pull up my screen here for a second. Give me a moment. Oops, 1 second. And then remember, if you have a question, just feel free to ask the question and I'll do my best to answer it. So I'm going to share my screen and then we're going to take a look at this. There we are. And today's session, it's going to be a Q&A, and it's going to be, what's the constant growth model and how do I apply it? And we're going to have some fun. We're going to start actually with a question. Now, this is a lecture that I've given in the past where I'm going to ask you a few questions and I want you to try to answer them as I ask them. So let's look at the first question. First question is, what is the oldest company in the world? That's interesting. Now, you think about some old companies and the like, you know, there's some old companies around. I was just reading a book by a podcast guest of mine, and he wrote a book called Power Failure. And he wrote about the history of GE. That's a very old company. The next question is, what country is it in? What country is that company in? And the final question is, what sector is it in? Is it agriculture, or like rice growing, or what is that oldest company? Well, I'm going to give you the answer. It's called NOK. That's what I'm going to call it. And it's, in fact, certified by Guinness World Records as the world's oldest hotel. And it's famous for natural, free-flowing hot springs. It's been continuously operating at the same site since 705 AD. That means uninterrupted service for 1,321 years. I mean, that's crazy. Nobody guesses this when I talk about it. And it's been run by the same family for 52 generations until 2017. And they sold it eventually to a company that now manages it and tries to maintain it. And there it is. Let's go. I can't wait to go to Japan again and see what's going on there. But that is what it looks like. And it would be pretty cool to go. Now, why am I talking to you about the oldest company in the world? Well, how does that tie into finance? I'm going to tell you now. So let's go back to this company's founding. Let's imagine that it's 705 AD. And to value NOK, we're going to use the dividend discount model. So we start with a dividend. Let's imagine the company paid out 100% of its profits as dividend. And growth, let's assume that we could accurately predict that dividends would grow on average 2%. You know, some years higher, some years lower, but on average from 705 until 2025, the dividends would grow at 2%. And, always press the wrong button there, hold on. And the cost of equity, we're going to say that we know it perfectly. At 705, the cost of equity is 8%. That's the average cost of equity over the whole life of this company. Now, remember that we're back in time, so we're not talking about today. And from this, we can actually calculate the expected dividend. So let's do that. In year number one, which would be 705, so we're going to assume that we started at the beginning of 705, and at the end of 705, we would be at the end of our first year. And the dividend would be 1.02. Now, I'm not going to use currency because currency doesn't matter. Whatever currency, yen, dollars, whatever, we're going to assume it was in yen. But here we can see that we can also discount that dividend by the discount rate that we talked about of 8%. And that means that if we were looking at the company from the beginning of year 705, by the end, if we were looking at that time, we would say that that dividend of 1.02 is worth to us 0.944. But If we were at the beginning of 705, we wouldn't be just getting the dividends for 705. We would also get a dividend for 706. And we know that the dividends are growing at 2%. And so that causes the dividend to grow to be 1.04 at the end of 705. And in the end of 707, our third year of operation, it's going to be 1061. And then we can carry that on and we can look at from years 1, in this case, to 9. So ninth year would be 713. And our dividend would have grown from 1.02 up to 1.195. So now I'm going to collapse the column, the rows, and I'm just going to look at the row of year 2016, which is the 1,312th year of the company's existence. And dividend is going to be, get this. Now look at that carefully, right? It's $192 billion worth of dividend. But unfortunately, because it's so far in the future and we're discounting it by 8%, it's worth nothing. 0.000000. So there's actually is a digit there that it has some value, but it's 0.00000 something. And if we look at the next year, 2017, we're forecasting, we're in year 705 and we're forecasting out for the life of this company. And we can see in 2017, the dividend will be 195.9 billion currency. And we can carry that all the way out to 2025. And that would have meant that the dividend in year 2025 would be 229 billion yen in this case. But because we're discounting at 8% over many, many years, in this case, 1,321 years, the value of that at such a far distance away would be 0. So now what we can do, the next step in this is once we have that dividend stream of 1,321 years, we can reduce each year's dividend by the discount rate, as we saw, 8%. And then we can just sum those discounted values and we get the value of the company. That's it. Again, we sum the present value of the dividends, and that present value is using the cost of equity and the raising each of these to the number of years. And we can get this number, the sum of all the discounted dividends at a growth rate of 2%, cost of equity of 8%, the value that we would be forecasting in year 705 is 17. All the future dividends are worth 17. Now, we could solve this problem in an easier way. I want to introduce you to finance economist Myron Gordon. He lived until 2010, and he was a professor of finance at University of Toronto. And I studied him when I was young. And in 1956, along with Eli Shapiro, he published a method for valuing a stock or business now known as the Gordon Growth Model or the constant growth model. His Gordon Growth Model values a stock as the present value of dividends that grow at a constant rate. Well, we are using a constant rate of growth of 2%. And it's a simplified but practical dividend discount framework. And it works because it sums an infinite geometric progression of dividends that grow at rate G and are discounted at rate R. So we have a growth rate and a discount rate in the denominator, growth rate in the numerator and a discount rate in the denominator. And basically we can push those out further and further. And ultimately, as long as R, the discount rate, is greater than the growth rate, the discounted dividend stream converges to a finite value. We can calculate value. If the R is less than the G, we can't use it. So we're going to end up, what Myron Scholes showed was that we can actually simplify the formula down to the value of a stock is equal to the dividend at time 1 divided by the risk minus the growth, or the discount rate minus the growth rate of that dividend. Done. That's it. Now, this is a key thing that Scholes, brought to the world. And in fact, you can apply it right now. You don't need a fancy forecasting methodology. You don't need to build a big model. You can just simply say, what is the dividend I'm expecting for this company at time 1, meaning 1 year ahead. What is the discount rate minus the growth rate? You put those in, and you are going to get, and now let's assume that you're putting in the right numbers, right? That's the hard part, is coming up with the right numbers. But if you've got the right numbers in there, then you are going to get the value of the stock. You can do it right now with NVIDIA or any others. Now, what's also interesting is when you bring it down to these 3 variables, we can manipulate things, and we can actually calculate. We can use, instead of using value, we can use the share price. And we can say this share price at this discount rate, let's say we use a discount rate, and we come up with that, implies a growth rate of X. And if that implied growth rate is super high, then we can say, ooh, this company may be overpriced. Now, I want to show you some other stuff about this. So again, all we need is the dividend at time 1 and the R and the G. So let's go back to our cash flow for NOK. Here we had the table of the dividends, and in fact, we only need the first one, 1.02. We know the growth rate is 2. We know the cost of equity is 8. So if we plug that into this formula, 1.02 divided by 0.08 minus 0.02, we are going to end up with what? The exact same result as what I showed you if we were actually to forecast all the dividends. Now, I'm showing you this because I want you to understand when we use the dividend, the constant growth model, it's usually for the terminal period of a stock. And now you can understand that that model is very robust. I mean, it's perfect. And so now, ultimately, the only thing that an investor can get from a company is dividends. If you're not working in the company, the best that you're going to receive is dividends. And if you hold a stock for forever, you get the dividends from that stock forever. But nobody holds stock forever these days, right? Everybody's selling stock, 6 months, 3 months. Next thing you know, they're selling stock. So, but imagine that Warren Buffett has held Coca-Cola now for nearly 40 years. That's an incredible amount of time. Now, it's not 1,300 years, but still, it's long. Now, if you buy a stock at the beginning of a year and you sell at the end of the year, what are you going to get? Just 1 year holding. You're going to get the dividend that's paid for that 1 year's profit, and you're going to get the selling price when you exit, whatever that's going to be. So let's talk about valuing a stream of dividends. What I'm going to ask is, what is the value of the price at times 1? Let's look at this formula that I've just described earlier, but I'm just going to mention it here. If you hold a stock for 1 year, you're going to get the dividend at time 1 plus the price at time 1. Those two combined give you the value. Let's say that the dividend is 2 and the price is 15. The value is 17. And that's how we get it. But the question that we want to have is, when you sell the stock at the end of 1 year, you got to sell it to somebody. Who are you selling it to? You're selling it to a buyer. And the buyer is going to give you a price. What are they going to base that price on? Future dividends from the company. So what about if you hold a stock for 2 years? You're going to get dividend for the first year and dividend for the second year, and then you're going to sell it in the second year, you're going to get a price. So you can see in the second year, you're going to get 2 cash flows, the second year's dividend and the second year's price. But what price are you going to sell it at in the market? Well, it's unknown, but I can tell you it's going to be based upon people's expectation of what they're going to gain from this stock. Now, we can do the same thing. Imagine that we hold a stock for 3 years. That means we're going to get dividend in year 1, dividend in year 2, dividend in year 3, plus we're going to sell at the end of year 3. We're going to get that price. This is how we can understand value. We can do that for 4 years and 5 years and understand the cash flows that we're getting. But the key thing to this whole discussion is, at what price are we selling it? And how is a person valuing it? Ultimately, it comes down to dividends. Now, let's look at this first case. We're going to actually do it for NOK. So basically, imagine that we held NOK for 1 year. We would get a discounted value of the dividend of 0.94 plus a discounted value of 1606. Now, what is this 1606? That is the value of all the dividend stream after the first year. And I say sell at year 2 on there. I actually mean at the end of year 1. So let's now say, well, what if we held it for 2 years? Well, we would get the discounted value of the dividend in the first year, the discounted value of the dividend in the second year, plus all the future dividend values. Now, if you go over to the right, you can see that the value is 17 because it's the same dividend stream that we valued before using the constant growth model or just summing them up. Now we're just separating as to when you're going to buy and when you're going to sell. And imagine someone buys it and holds it for 3 years. Here we can see for 3 years, you're going to get a discounted value of the dividend of 0.94, 0.89, and 0.84. Plus, you're going to get the value of all future dividends up until that point. In other words, if the market was perfectly efficient and this was trading in the market, you could sell it for 14.32. And we can carry this formula all the way down and understand that if we look at the bottom row, basically, we can count the number of dividends we received. That tells us the number of years that we've held it. So dividend 1, 0.942, 0.893, 0.844, 0.85, 0.75, 6, 0.71. So imagine we held the stock for 6 years, plus we sold it for 12.06. Where does the 12.06 come? That's the price. And I'm saying that that's equal to value. And the value is the sum of all future dividends over the whole period. And in this case, what you can see is that 71% of the value in this final version at the bottom comes from the selling price in the 6th year. That's different from if we only held it for 1 year. 94% of the price would come from the price that we sold it at the future period. So this gives you a little picture, and that's the main thing that I want to talk about today. I wanted to discuss the idea. Let me just stop sharing here. I wanted to make sure that we have a clear understanding of the constant growth model. Once you understand the constant growth model and understand that it is academically rigorous, I mean, it works, then you can start to think, wait a minute, Andrew, I don't even really need to do a big forecast of free cash flow and all that. I can just use the constant growth dividend model. And I have a friend of mine, his name's RJ, and he was managing a portfolio of his own money for many years when he was younger, and he still manages it now. But the thing I asked him, how do you value the stock? He says, I only use the constant growth model. I never do forecasts and models. And that really got me thinking about the value of the constant growth model. So now you know the constant growth model and how that fits in with the dividend discount model, and then how you can apply it. That's the main lesson I wanted to get across today. And I hope you have a great weekend, and I will see you